There's something profoundly unsettling about the knock at the door you never asked for. Not because of fear, but because of interruption, of your inner world, your peace, your sacred space. If you've ever felt guilt or confusion about not wanting company, you're not broken. In fact, you might be far more spiritually awake than you realize. You see, the modern world celebrates noise, but the soul longs for silence. This speech isn't just about introversion. It's about uncovering what your resistance to visitors reveals about the deep structure of your second why. At the root of this tendency lies a call to transformation, self-protection, and spiritual evolution. Stay with me, because by the end, you may no longer apologize for your solitude. You may finally understand it as your soul's most honest prayer. There is a quiet kind of strength that goes unnoticed in this world. Strength not loud or socially validated, but one that emerges in the silent refusal to be disturbed by the superficial. When a person says, "I don't like having visitors," they are often met with misunderstanding. The world, trained to equate extroversion with health and success, looks upon solitude as a deficiency. But the soul operates according to different laws than society. It moves inward when the external becomes too noisy. It closes the gates, not out of arrogance, but out of reverence for something sacred, growing within. To not want visitors is not a sign of misanthropy or emotional dysfunction. It is, in many cases, an indication of a soul that is seeking wholeness. In the psychology of depth, such a preference often points toward a profound engagement with one's inner life. There is a richness to solitude that those fixated on constant interaction rarely comprehend. It is in the stillness, in the absence of external demands, that one hears the whispers of the unconscious. The individual who avoids casual company is often someone who has begun to prioritize those whispers over the noise of conformity. In modern society, where constant connection is celebrated as a virtue, the one who detaches is viewed as odd. But the truth is that the longing for isolation is frequently born out of psychological necessity. It is the psyche's way of protecting itself from fragmentation. The human personality, when overstimulated by trivial exchanges, begins to lose cohesion. The self becomes scattered in small talk, disoriented by meaningless rituals. The avoidance of visitors, then, is not necessarily antisocial behavior, is sometimes the psyche's cry for integrity, for uninterrupted connection with its deeper dimensions. When you withdraw from the external world, you do not do so because you are weaker or incapable. You withdraw because the soul requires space to breathe. It is not the absence of courage, but the presence of clarity. You begin to notice that certain interactions cost you something sacred: your energy, your peace, your sense of direction, and you instinctively protect yourself, not because you are afraid, but because you are beginning to remember that your time and attention are holy. The preference for solitude is, therefore, often a mark of a developing self, one that refuses to be consumed by the false urgencies of others. This brings us into the realm of boundaries, those invisible lines that define where the self ends and the other begins. The soul, as it matures, begins to reject anything that violates its boundaries. Visitors, especially those who come without deeper resonance, can easily disrupt the internal order you've been building. The small talk, the performative politeness, the draining effort to appear engaged, all of these things exhaust a soul that has outgrown artificial connections. And so the psyche develops resistance. It begins to sense when a presence is an intrusion rather than a communion. You feel it in your body, the tightening of the chest, the slight contraction of spirit signals that your inner world is about to be disturbed. And these signals are not symptoms to be pathologized. They are signs of wisdom. The more you grow inwardly, the more refined your psychic boundaries become. You can no longer tolerate the chaos of those who carry unprocessed emotion. You can no longer pretend to laugh at things that wound your intelligence. You can no longer host energies that are not aligned with your values. And so you begin to say no in subtle ways. You stop opening the door so quickly. You stop picking up every call. You stop entertaining every invitation. It is not rudeness, it is discernment. The soul is learning to protect its sanctuary. And while the world may not understand, you begin to feel something you haven't felt in a long time: peace. What others see as coldness or aloofness is, in fact, the emergence of authenticity. To refuse unnecessary company is to say yes to what truly matters. It is to become a steward of your own energy. And herein lies a deep truth. The human being who does not guard their energy becomes fragmented. They become a servant to the needs and expectations of others, pulled in every direction, and slowly detached from their own center. The refusal to be visited without reason is a quiet declaration that your soul is no longer available for exploitation. There is also a subtler force at play, the sensitivity to energy that grows as the psyche becomes more attuned to itself. When you have spent time in solitude, you begin to notice the hidden tensions in others. You feel their anxiety before they speak. You absorb their dissatisfaction even when they smile. You become like a finely tuned instrument, registering the slightest discord. And this makes shallow interaction more exhausting than ever. You do not want visitors because you do not want to carry what is not yours. You have spent too long transmuting the emotional chaos of others, mistaking it for empathy. Now, you know better. Now, you realize that protecting your energy is not selfishness, it's self-respect. This kind of soul sensitivity is not something that appears all at once. It is born from suffering, from confusion, from years of ignoring your own needs. There comes a point where the body can no longer tolerate the charade. The visits that once seemed harmless now feel like violations. The laughter that once felt friendly now echoes with hollowness. Something inside you begins to rebel, not against people, but against the illusion that you must always be available. And from this rebellion, a new sense of self begins to emerge, stronger, quieter, truer. This emerging self is not interested in appearances. It is not trying to win popularity contests. It is not motivated by external validation. It seeks depth, honesty, and meaning. And when these are absent, it prefers silence. It chooses the book over the banquet, the long walk over the loud party, the one real friend over the many pretenders. The refusal to have visitors is not a withdrawal from life, is a movement toward the real. It is the recognition that not all presence is nourishing, that some company depletes, while silence restores, that the soul's growth depends on the quality, not the quantity, of interaction. The soul, when it begins to heal, becomes acutely aware of its own fragility and power. It knows that certain energies can trigger regression, while others can awaken transformation. It becomes careful, not paranoid, but purposeful. It understands that the space it inhabits must reflect its inner order, that the external environment, including the people within it, must resonate with the internal journey. This is why you begin to feel resistance to visitors. Is your soul's way of asserting that it is no longer willing to be invaded. But this resistance is not hatred. It is not bitterness. It is, if anything, a gesture of reverence for the sacredness of your path. The modern psyche is inundated with stimulation, and this constant noise prevents the deeper layers of consciousness from emerging. When you turn away from casual company, you are making room for something higher, for insight, for reflection, for alignment. You are not avoiding others. You are answering the call of your own becoming. And this call often comes disguised as discomfort. You begin to feel uneasy in conversations that once felt effortless. You begin to sense dissonance in relationships that once gave you security. The comfort of distraction begins to rot from within. The things that once numbed you now irritate. This is the soul's alarm system, activating because it is ready to evolve. And with this evolution comes solitude, not as loneliness, but as necessity. Not as exile, but as initiation. In the silence of your own space, you meet aspects of yourself that no visitor can mirror. You confront the shadows that polite company allows you to ignore. You encounter the grief, the longing, the forgotten dreams buried beneath performance. And slowly, the soul begins to restore itself. Not through conversation, but through presence. Not through visitors, but through vision. You begin to see your life differently. You begin to feel more deeply. And this new depth requires protection. You no longer open the door to everyone, because you have realized that not everyone is meant to enter the temple. Some people come with chaos, with masks, with unconscious projections. They do not see you. They see only what they want from you. And your soul, tired of being seen through filters, starts to close the gates. Not to punish, but to preserve. Not to isolate, but to deepen. This shift in your psyche is not something to be explained or justified. It is to be honored. When you feel the need to say no to company, listen. When you feel the pull to retreat, obey. These are not weaknesses. These are signs that your soul is maturing, that it is stepping out of the collective trance and reclaiming its own rhythm. And that rhythm, though invisible, will guide you to a place where peace is not a luxury, but a way of being. There is a profound unease that lives in those who have tasted truth and then are asked to return to the shallow waters of the ordinary. You begin to notice that it is not just visitors you resist, it is the ritual of pretending, the expectation to play roles that no longer fit your evolving self. People often associate solitude with shyness or fear, but rarely do they recognize it as the soul's protest against inauthenticity. To not want guests, to prefer the solitude of your own thoughts, may in fact be a deep resistance to living through a false self. The false self is the mask we learn to wear to gain approval, to avoid conflict, to secure a place in a social world that demands compromise at the cost of our integrity. This false self thrives in environments where surface interaction is rewarded. But the soul, in its hunger for meaning, begins to reject this masquerade. And with that rejection comes a recoil from social expectations that feel empty. You do not hate others, you simply cannot keep pretending. You can no longer feign interest in things that bore you. You cannot laugh at jokes that injure your intelligence. You cannot host conversations that avoid the truth of human suffering and transformation. This is the reason why many find themselves uncomfortable around visitors. It is not merely that people are exhausting. It is that the social contract requires a kind of dishonesty, one that the awakened soul can no longer bear. The price of admission into most social circles is self-betrayal. And the one who has started to heal begins to withdraw, not out of bitterness, but out of necessity. There is a longing for truth, for the real, for the raw. And until such depth is encountered in another, solitude becomes the more nourishing companion. At first, this can feel like a kind of exile. You wonder if something is wrong with you. You remember how easily you used to flow in and out of crowds, how simple it once was to be agreeable. But that version of you was asleep. It played roles without knowing it. It mirrored others to feel safe. And now, after encountering yourself more deeply, you cannot go back. You see too clearly, you sense too sharply, and the moment someone enters your space with an unconscious mask, your soul recoils not because it is cold, but because it has grown honest. This honesty is painful, but it is also liberating. You begin to understand that solitude is not loneliness, is the space where the false self dies. Every moment you spend away from the crowd is a moment where your real self breathes a little easier. The silence becomes your teacher. The absence of visitors becomes your medicine. In time, you realize that you are not missing out on anything. You are simply stepping into something deeper, a life that is no longer dictated by social games, but by inner alignment. And with this realization comes a deeper pull inward. What most people interpret as social withdrawal is actually a sign of spiritual maturation. When the soul begins to grow, it turns its attention away from the external and focuses on the internal. The journey of individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, demands solitude. It requires that you listen, not to the voices of others, but to the voice within. And that voice, long silenced by social noise, can only be heard in stillness. In this stillness, strange things happen. You begin to grieve the self you abandoned to fit in. You recall moments when you silenced your instincts to make others comfortable. You relive the times when you betrayed your truth for the sake of being liked. And from this grief emerges wisdom. The soul, through suffering, begins to remember who it was before the world told it who it should be. It begins to reclaim its instincts, its preferences, its direction. And with each step, the pull inward grows stronger. This pull is not a rejection of others, it is a return to self. It is not an escape from life, it is a descent into its depths. You are not running from the world. You are trying to find the ground beneath it. And in this descent, you learn to see people differently. You no longer measure them by charm or status. You sense their energy. You listen to the silence beneath their words. You observe their unconscious patterns. And often, you find yourself unable to receive them, not because they are unworthy, but because they are still asleep. And the awakened soul cannot be fed by the dreams of the asleep. This is where discernment becomes crucial. You begin to realize that not everyone is meant to be near you. The soul has grown sensitive, like an open wound that reacts even to a whisper of dishonesty. You no longer allow visitors who bring chaos disguised as warmth. You no longer entertain those who offer distraction instead of presence. You become selective, not out of pride, but out of self-preservation. Because the deeper you go within, the more you realize how easily the external can disrupt your inner order. You are not building walls, you are building thresholds. You are not pushing people away, you are inviting them to rise. Only those who can meet you in truth are welcome. Only those who can sit in silence without fear are allowed in. Only those who are not threatened by your depth are given access. The rest, you bless from a distance. This is not cruelty, this is clarity. And clarity is what the soul craves above all else. The inner sanctuary must be protected. It is where your thoughts crystallize into insight. It is where your wounds whisper their ancient names. It is where your dreams speak without shame. And to open that space to everyone would be spiritual negligence. You no longer apologize for needing space. You no longer feel guilt for not answering the door. You begin to realize that your time, your presence, your attention, they are sacred offerings, not social obligations. And from this realization, a new kind of power is born. It is quiet but unmistakable. It is the power of someone who no longer needs to be understood in order to feel worthy. Someone who no longer seeks validation in empty rooms. Someone who is at peace in their own company. The one who does not like visitors is not broken. They are often healed in ways the world has yet to understand. They have faced the mirror without flinching. They have sat with sorrow without distraction. They have learned to find comfort, not in applause, but in alignment. And because of that, they are no longer available for the small talk of a world afraid of silence. They would rather speak with the stars, commune with dreams, walk barefoot into their own memories, than entertain another hour of pretended connection. They are not cold. They are not detached. They are not distant. They are burning with life, but in a frequency few can hear. Their solitude is not emptiness, is the fullness of being undisturbed. It is the temple where their truest self comes to pray. And unless a visitor arrives barefoot, humble, awake carrying the language of soul and silence, they are not permitted entry. Because the soul has waited too long to be seen, to be heard, to be held. And now, it refuses to be interrupted. This refusal is not defiance. It is devotion. It is the soul's way of reclaiming its rhythm after lifetimes of distortion. And in this rhythm, something ancient awakens a clarity, a purpose, a memory of who you were before the masks. This is the gift of turning inward. This is the blessing, hidden in your resistance to guests. You are not being difficult. You are being reborn. And only those who honor your rebirth are welcome at the door.